Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a place where the air feels older than the walls, a gallery lit only by a scatter of trembling candles, each one flickering like it's a little nervous about being here with you. You move slowly across creaking floorboards, your breath soft, your skin brushing cool pockets of shadow. Every portrait you pass seems to tilt just slightly toward you, like they've been waiting centuries to speak. And honestly, you probably won't survive this if one of them starts blinking. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me your location and local time. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step deeper into the gallery, and the glow settles into your eyes like warm syrup. The portraits stretch in both directions, tall as doorways, heavy with lacquer, and utterly convinced of their own importance. You walk, no, you drift, because that feels more appropriate here, like the room is conducting you rather than the other way around. A soft dustiness clings to the air, carrying the faint smell of linseed oil and old secrets. One portrait, the first to catch your attention, shows a duchess with hair coiled so tightly it must have been engineered by a team of mathematicians. Her gaze follows you in that unnervingly confident way aristocrats have, like she knows exactly where you hid the snacks. But the funny thing is, the eyes in this portrait feel slightly off. Not dangerous, just too aware. You lean closer, and the candlelight reveals a thin varnish layer that has yellowed with age, giving her irises an amber glow that makes her look like she's about to whisper, "Boo." A mainstream historical fact floats into your mind. By the 17th century, many royal galleries doubled as propaganda chambers, lined with portraits intended to intimidate visitors before they even met the monarch. You imagine walking through this same room centuries ago, feeling dozens of artificially serene faces judging your entire tax bracket. And then there's the quirky tidbit, one you heard somewhere, maybe a museum panel, or maybe a bored tour guide who needed to spice up Tuesday mornings, that painters once used crocodile dung-based pigments for certain yellows. You can't help glancing at the Duchess's golden sleeves now. Suddenly they feel more fragrant. You drift to the next canvas, taller than you, framed in thick walnut carved with vines, birds, and one creature that looks suspiciously like a very judgmental pigeon. The man in the portrait wears a velvet doublet and an expression suggesting that someone just explained modern Wi-Fi to him. His posture is rigid, his hand resting on a dagger that's more decorative than dangerous. Think of it as the Renaissance equivalent of posing with a luxury handbag. But something tugs at you, a subtle darkness behind him. You step closer. The painter deepened the shadows on the left side of his face, giving it a haunted quality that definitely wasn't flattering. Historians still argue whether those dramatic shadows were artistic flair or discreet commentary. Some say it was a bold stylistic flourish, others think the painter was hinting at the man's political troubles, and a small faction, bless them, believes the shadows were purely practical, hiding the fact that the nobleman had an unfortunate haircut that week. Truly, scholarship knows no limits. As you continue walking, the gallery's atmosphere grows heavier but not threatening, more like it's wrapping a soft velvet blanket around your shoulders. You can almost hear gentle murmurs from the walls, as if the portraits want to be acknowledged after centuries of patience. There's comfort in that, odd as it feels. These painted people, these curated, sculpted, perfectly posed images, once lived messy, chaotic lives that didn't match the smooth surfaces staring back at you. A painting of a scholar catches your eye. He holds a quill in one hand and a book in the other, which is hilarious because the book is clearly blank. You tilt your head. Was this laziness or a sly statement? Turns out scholars of the era often posed with blank pages because texts took forever to copy, and artists didn't have time to paint every word, unless they wanted to bill overtime to a prince who definitely wouldn't pay. It reminds you of turning in a half-finished school project, but making eye contact with deep confidence. The candlelight trembles again, and it brushes against a small portrait near the floor, an unusual placement. Most royal pieces were hung high to emphasize authority, but this one sits at your knee level, almost like it's shy. You kneel, and the wood creaks in sympathy. The portrait shows a young boy, maybe 6 or 7, wearing a stiff collar that would qualify as a medieval neck workout machine. His tiny hand holds a toy horse, but you barely notice it because his expression is so heartbreakingly serious, like he's already tired of palace politics and he hasn't even learned multiplication tables. The paint is cracked around his eyes, tiny fissures radiating like delicate spiderwebs. You trace them with your gaze, and something odd emerges. Beneath the crackle, there's a faint hint of a different expression, almost a smile, as though the original painting was altered. Royal families often updated portraits if a child's public persona needed adjusting. Cheerful air, serious air, stop playing with the goose and look regal air. You imagine the painter sighing heavily as a court official said, "Can we make him look more future kingish, but still cute?" You straighten, easing back into a slow, wandering pace. Your footsteps echo softly, mixing with the flickering sounds of the candles. Every time you breathe in, you taste that faint, metallic tang old paint leaves behind, like history has dissolved into the air. You remember hearing once that portraits were considered windows into the soul, which feels dramatic, but also strangely accurate when dozens of those souls are staring at you in unison. You feel oddly seen, comfortably seen, like the gallery, with all its secrets and exaggerations and unspoken stories, is welcoming you into its quiet, eternal evening. And then you encounter a portrait that's been slashed only lightly, a thin diagonal cut across the surface. It isn't vandalism, this looks older, intentional maybe. Art restorers sometimes discovered these slashes under layers of lacquer done by the original painters themselves to hide mistakes or make last-minute revisions. Imagine being so stressed about a nose shape that you commit a tiny artistic crime. The cut here reveals a stroke of bright red beneath the outer layer, something that doesn't belong in the final version. Perhaps the background once showed a tapestry or a cloak, or even a forbidden symbol. This gallery, you realize, isn't just decoration, it's a palimpsest of royal anxieties. As you step away, you feel your shoulders relax, your breathing deepen. The room hums softly, not with ghosts or danger, but with the gentle truth that every portrait, every curated image, has layers you weren't meant to see. And here you are, kneeling in dusty candlelight, unraveling them with sleepy curiosity. The gallery seems endless, stretching into dim corners you haven't yet explored. Your pace slows. Each painting leans forward slightly as if preparing to tell you something important, something buried, something softened by time. And so you keep walking deeper into the hush, deeper into the quiet companionship of faces frozen in their most perfect lies. You move on without breaking the rhythm of your breathing, your footsteps sliding across the floor so softly you start to wonder if you're still walking or simply drifting the way dust motes float in a sunbeam. The gallery narrows slightly, funneling you toward a cluster of portraits that seem less polished and more daring, not messy. No royal court would tolerate anything resembling spontaneity, but rebellious in a subtle blink and you'll miss it kind of way. You lean in, letting the candlelight skim your face as though you're sharing a secret with the painted figures. One portrait stops you cold. The frame is simple, almost austere, as though whoever ordered it didn't want too many gilded distractions. The painting itself shows a court painter, an artist, who, judging by the stiff collar and slightly haunted look, did not ask for this modelling gig. He sits behind an easel, brush in hand, but here's the thing. The canvas he's painting within the painting is completely blank. Empty. Not even a pencil sketch. At first you think, okay, maybe the client wanted a meta moment, but no, the brush in his hand is tipped with colour, deep, midnight blue, so he was working on something that didn't make it into the final depiction. That's when it hits you. This painter might have been quietly inserting commentary into the court's propaganda machine, hiding truths in the negative space. Sometimes, the absence of an image is louder than the image itself. And in a court full of busybodies, spies, and people who took powdered wigs way too seriously, silence could be revolutionary. You lean closer, nose almost brushing the varnish. You notice the painter's eyes aren't looking at his canvas, they're glancing sideways toward someone or something just outside the frame. You follow his gaze instinctively like a cat chasing a laser pointer, but there's nothing there, just the wall. But the angle of his irises is too precise to be accidental. Artists of the period were famously dramatic about meaning. If they painted someone looking off-screen, it was for a reason. Historians still argue whether this painter's sideways stare was fear, admiration, or sheer exhaustion from working under royals who believed urgent deadline meant redo all portraits by dinner. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind, uninvited but not unwelcome. Court painters in early modern Europe were often bound to strict protocols, unable to depict flaws, controversies, or even minor inconveniences like, this person had a weird ear. Painters were expected to beautify, flatter, and generally pretend the aristocracy woke up looking like lightly photoshopped angels. It's no wonder some artists rebelled in tiny, nearly invisible ways, changing the tilt of a head, altering a symbolic colour, or painting blank canvases that practically screamed, "I know the truth, and you can't stop me." Your eyes slide downward to the painter's hands. They're rendered with meticulous care, slender fingers smudged with pigment, knuckles slightly bent, veins faint but visible. You notice a tiny detail. There's a dab of red on the underside of his thumb, not anywhere near the palette colours visible. A rogue pigment, a colour that shouldn't be there. And that's when a memory surfaces. A quirky tidbit about old art studios. Many painters hid contraband pigments, especially rare reds and purples, which were expensive, restricted, or symbolically charged. Some came from crushed insects, some came from minerals mined in remote mountain ranges, one came from a mollusk so smelly that only the bravest artisans dared work with it. You imagine this painter dabbing a little forbidden red in secret, using it to encode messages in shadows or folds of fabric. Probably felt like medieval graffiti. You take a small step back. The painter's expression shifts in the light. Or maybe that's just your imagination doing somersaults. He looks like he knows you're onto him, like he's relieved someone finally noticed, like he's been waiting for you. The thought makes your chest warm. Continuing down the narrow stretch, you pass portraits of noble families, each more polished than the last. But in the corner of almost all of them there's a single, reoccurring motif, a tiny brushstroke that doesn't fit the style, almost like a signature, but deliberate and disguised. You start spotting them like Easter eggs, on a hem, in a corner shadow, hidden in a fold of silk. You whisper, "Okay, that's cute," and your voice echoes, soft as a cat pawing at a blanket. When you reach the next painting, a severe-looking duchess with cheekbones sharp enough to slice an orange, you notice something odd. Her pearl necklace, painted with almost microscopic precision, has one pearl out of alignment, not broken, not chipped, just rotated. In portraiture, pearls represented purity, but a misaligned one. That's practically a Renaissance subtweet. You lean closer and see that the rotated pearl reflects a tiny, distorted shape, something like a silhouette. Maybe another person in the room during the sitting, maybe someone the Duchess didn't want anyone to know about, or maybe the painter slipping in a warning to viewers centuries later. Look deeper. Historians still argue whether such tiny distortions were artistic accidents or encrypted messages. Some say painters were passive tools of propaganda. Others claim they were subversive geniuses operating under tyrants. Personally, you lean toward geniuses, if only because it makes wandering through this gallery feel like solving a mildly aristocratic treasure hunt. The air grows cooler, not dramatically, just enough to raise a soft shiver along your arms. You wrap your hands around yourself and continue, breathing in slow, steady rhythms. The portraits on both sides feel closer now, their eyes sharper, their expressions more nuanced. You could swear the candle flames lower themselves for ambiance. Thoughtful candles, how charming. You pause at a portrait that looks almost unfinished. The background is muted, the clothing carefully rendered, but the face is strangely unrefined, not sloppy, just bare, like the artist refused to complete it. The figure stands tall, wearing a robe adorned with embroidered fleur-de-lis, the royal emblem repeated with obsessive regularity. But the face is only a faint sketch, ghost-like, as though waiting for a person who never showed up. You tilt your head. Unfinished royal commissions often had dramatic backstories. Maybe the sitter died unexpectedly. Maybe they fell out of favor. Maybe they realized sitting still for 8 hours while someone painted your paws was overrated. But the real possibility, the one that makes you smirk, is that the painter simply refused. Quiet rebellion comes in many forms, and sometimes it looks like, "No, Your Grace, I will not repaint your chin for the 12th time." You touch the edge of the frame gently. The wood is unexpectedly warm, like it's holding on to the temperature of every hand that has ever brushed it. The warmth comforts you more than you expect. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the feeling linger. When you open them, the gallery seems slightly shifted, not physically, but atmospherically. The portraits feel more alive, more expressive, as though the painter's quiet acts of rebellion have woken them up. Or maybe you're just getting used to their company. One final portrait in this section stands out, a large panel showing the entire court surrounding the monarch, but your attention goes straight to the painter in the background, half hidden, staring directly at you. The only figure breaking the fourth wall. His expression is gentle, almost amused, like he knew someone centuries later would be wandering through the dust and candle glow, piecing together all his little rebellions with sleepy satisfaction. You smile back, barely a centimeter of movement, but enough. It feels like a secret handshake across time, and you continue on deeper into the hush, carrying that quiet rebellion with you like a warm ember in your chest. You're still drifting forward, keeping that same unhurried, almost sleepwalk-like rhythm, when another portrait stops you, not with grandeur, not with drama, but with a smile so slight and suspicious that your own lips twitch in automatic response. It's the kind of smile that makes you think, someone here knew exactly what they were doing. The canvas is tall, framed in gilded acanthus leaves, so shiny it seems allergic to subtlety. But the woman in the painting, she is all quiet mischief. Her dress, layered in velvets and embroidered with tiny gold knots, is beautifully rendered. Her posture is flawless, shoulders pulled back as if a court etiquette instructor were lurking behind the easel. But her smile, a whisper, a smirk, pretending it isn't, a secret holding its breath. You step closer until you can see the delicate cracks in the paint that run across her lips like faded laughter lines. And that's when you realize something. This smile is wrong for a portrait of her rank and era. Noblewomen were supposed to look demure, predictable, and slightly bored, like they'd just sat through a 3-hour lecture on grain tariffs. Smiling was rare, and smirking was basically an act of political defiance. You tilt your head slowly, and the smile seems to shift with the light. The left corner curves a little higher, almost as if the painter added the smirk last minute, after everyone supervising had left the studio to argue about wig powder. A mainstream historical fact drifts gently into your mind. During the late Renaissance, court portraits were heavily regulated, often reviewed by ministers or family members before being approved for public display. The sitter's public image mattered more than the sitter's actual personality. And here, you feel personality leaking through like light under a locked door. You lean closer still. Her eyes are the real giveaway. They're calm, yes, but there's a glint, sharp, knowing, unmistakably smug. A glint that seems to say, "You and I, we know something they don't." You whisper back, very wisely, "Ma'am, I am but a humble wanderer. Please don't drag me into political intrigue." And your voice gets swallowed by the velvety air. Your gaze drops to her hands. In her right, she holds a folded letter. Nothing outrageous. Lots of women posed with letters. It implied literacy and elegance, a sort of Renaissance version of holding a hardcover book in an Instagram photo. But here's the problem. The seal on the letter doesn't match her husband's crest. It's from a rival noble house. Historians still argue whether this letter was symbolic of an alliance, a scandal, or a very high-stakes flirtationship. One camp insists it was artistic shorthand for educated lady. Another group claims it was a political jab at her husband. And then there's the fringe group, God bless them, who argue she was having a torrid, highly literary romance, possibly involving secret poems and extremely dramatic metaphors. You squint more closely at the seal, noticing that the painter rendered it with microscopic precision. That red pigment again, the kind made from crushed cochineal insects imported from the New World at great cost, reserved for important details, hidden signals, possibly forbidden ones. A quirky tidbit you once heard in some dusty corner of the internet resurfaces. In a few rare portraits, painters hid coded confessions of political sabotage by altering the positioning of hands, jewellery, or letters. Some symbols were subtle enough that only the sitter and the painter understood them. A letter angled slightly downward could imply discontent. A letter angled upward, trust, horizontal, neutrality, and diagonally meant trouble, meant, guess which angle this letter is? You let out a soft, impressed hum. The woman's expression seems to grow bolder the longer you look. Her eyes glint brighter. You wonder whether the painter coaxed this expression out of her, or whether she insisted on it, knowing it would slip under the court's radar and whisper her truth across centuries. But then you notice something even stranger. The background behind her, an elaborate tapestry, isn't symmetrical. One of the woven birds looks off, different colour, different shape, almost hidden, like the painter intentionally left a small inconsistency. You lean closer, slow and deliberate, like you're trying not to scare a skittish creature. It's a nightingale, a delicate creature associated with forbidden love in several European courts. And this one, painted in a shade of blue that doesn't exist anywhere else in the tapestry. A soft laugh escapes you. Bold move, you murmur, and the gallery seems to exhale. You step back, taking in the whole portrait again. The smirk, the letter, the nightingale, the confidently tilted chin, each one a thread woven together into a secret tapestry of defiance. And you're here, centuries later, tugging at those threads in the dim glow, unravelling her truth, one brushstroke at a time. You drift away, But as you do, you swear that the smirk sharpens just a touch, like she's telling you, "Good, someone finally noticed." The next portrait eases into your field of vision, calmer, colder, more controlled. A man this time, his face so impossibly symmetrical, it screams royal retouching. His lips are pressed flat, his expression sculpted to radiate stoic leadership. But it's the shadows you notice, deepened under the eyes, darkened near the edge of the jaw. Shadows that aren't natural. Shadows that hint at something the artist wasn't allowed to paint outright. And here's the kicker. When you lean in, you realize the shadows are painted using a mixed pigment that includes a rare black made from charred peach pits. That pigment was often used symbolically to represent mourning or scandal. You feel your stomach drop a little. Something happened here, something someone wanted hidden but not erased. Someone was being messy, you whisper, and honestly, it tracks. The royal's eyes look outward, past you, toward the far end of the gallery, as though he's watching someone approach, someone dangerous, or someone he wronged. Shadows can be louder than expressions. You inhale softly. The air is cooler here, tinged with old varnish. Your fingers trail along the frame as you move on, the rhythm of your steps slowing, deepening, sinking with your breath. Somewhere behind you, the smirking woman watches. Somewhere ahead, more portraits wait, their secrets thick, their stories quiet but insistent. And you keep going, lulled by the hush, wrapped in candlelight, reading history the way it always wanted to be read, patiently, gently, and with a slightly raised eyebrow. You follow the gallery's slow, narrowing curve until the air seems to shift again, denser, heavier, carrying a faint metallic scent that clings to the back of your throat like old coins. It's the kind of smell that tells you you're approaching something important, or at least something that once terrified a lot of very wealthy people. The candles here burn lower, their flames trembling as if they've been warned to behave. And there it is, a portrait so large it could double as a door to another dimension, hopefully one with better snacks. The frame alone is outrageous, carved lions, gilded sunbursts, spiraling laurels, and absolutely no sense of moderation. A king is painted here, no mistake about it. Crown, ermine mantle, sceptre, that particular expression of forced serenity that rulers use when they want to pretend everything is perfectly fine while their kingdom is 3 minutes from catching fire. You pause, letting your eyes adjust through the soft golden haze. The king stands tall, chin lifted, posture rigidly upright, in what is clearly a pose invented by someone who hated comfort. His robes fall in heavy folds, cascading down to the edge of the frame like a velvet waterfall. The crown sits squarely on his head, immovable, gleaming, and probably giving him a migraine. At first glance, he looks exactly like you'd expect, powerful, immaculate, deeply convinced of his own magnificence. But then you see it, the shadow. It clings to the right side of his body, sprawling across the canvas in a way that feels wrong. Too long, too angled, as if the light source in the painting had rebellious dreams of its own. The shadow isn't subtle either. It's deliberate, thickened with strokes of smoky black and deep umber. You step closer, nose nearly brushing the varnish, and that's when you notice the shape. The shadow doesn't perfectly match the king's outline. It should. Shadows usually do, unless you're dealing with expressionist art, or the king had an unusually lumpy elbow. But this one dips inward where his arm is straight, and bulges outward where nothing should be. You exhale softly. Someone was being scandalous. A mainstream fact lights up in your memory. During the Baroque era, royal portraits often used shadows to indicate moral or political tension, a subtle language between artist and viewer. A darker shadow could suggest past controversies, unspoken vices, or the looming presence of rivals. But this is practically a confession. You move your fingers carefully around the frame, tracing the cold gilded edge, and lean in again. The outline of the shadow bulges just enough to resemble another figure, a second presence. Historians still argue whether the mysterious shape in this king's portrait represented a rival prince, a disgraced advisor, or a scandalous lover whose name was swiftly scrubbed from official records. No agreement. No definitive answer. Just centuries of whispering debates echoing through academic hallways where someone inevitably trips over a stack of dusty papers. You tilt your head. The shadow's proportions suggest someone standing very close, too close to be an accident. Close enough to imply intimacy or betrayal, depending on the angle of your imagination. And since royal courts were basically high-drama reality shows without elimination rounds, both are equally plausible. A quirky tidbit pops up. Some artists mixed a touch of wine into their darker pigments to create a softer, reddish undertone. You spot that exact undertone here in the deeper folds of the shadow. Someone used wine pigment, either symbolically or because the painter was having a week. You squint. Sure enough, the shadow has that faint burgundy glimmer when the candlelight tilts. It makes the hidden figure look warm, alive, like they're still leaning toward the king, whispering something into history's ear. The king's expression now feels different. A tightness around the mouth, a stiffness in the gaze. As though he knows what the shadow reveals. As though he tried to look noble and serene, but the painter immortalized more than his throne. He captured fear, or guilt, or longing. You stand back slowly. The gallery seems to breathe with you. Your eyes drag across the king's robe, noticing a fold on the right that's been repainted. The texture is slightly smoother there, the pigment newer. A restoration? Or a revision made only days after the original completion? Hard to know. Courts often ordered last-minute adjustments when they noticed something inconvenient. Like a shadow with opinions. You whisper, "They really thought we wouldn't notice," and the faintest smile curls at the edges of your mouth. Then something else tugs at your attention, the king's right hand. The fingers look rigid, strained, as though gripping the scepter with too much force. But the scepter's angle is strange. It points slightly toward the shadow, not toward the viewer or the crown. A subtle accusation, a warning, or the painter's sly way of saying, "If this painting gets me executed, at least I was dramatic about it." You breathe in slowly. The air tastes cold, like the moment before thunder. The portrait looms over you, massive and silent, but its silence is restless, filled with what it can't say openly. You get the feeling the painter wanted the shadow to be seen, wanted someone centuries later, someone exactly like you, to stand in this flickering chamber and understand the truth behind the gold and velvet. You step aside and the shadow seems to shift again, as though it's adjusting itself in the dim light, trying to keep its secrets just out of reach. The hair on your arms rises, not from fear, more from the sensation that you're witnessing a kind of quiet rebellion preserved under varnish. You walk on, slowly, letting the king and his shadow recede behind you. But the shadows don't end with him. A narrower portrait hangs just beyond, depicting a young courtier whose expression is overly bright, too perfect. You recognize the classic, "I'm hiding something" smile instantly. A glance downward reveals a small, darkened area beneath the chair he sits on. A shadow inconsistent with the room's lighting, painted with messy haste, as if someone added it later. You lean in, The shadow's outline resembles a boot. Someone standing behind the chair. So faint you'd miss it unless you were looking. Okay, now they're just toying with us, you murmur. You straighten your back, take a slow breath, and continue deeper into the gallery. The king's shadow problem lingers behind you, but its echo follows, reminding you that every portrait is two stories, the one on the surface and the one the painter slipped through the cracks. And you aren't here for the surface, you're here for the layers, the secrets, the whispers trapped in pigment. So you walk on, letting the shadows guide you forward, toward canvases waiting to reveal even stranger things under their fragile skins. You move deeper into the gallery, and the floorboards shift beneath your feet with a soft groan, like the building is waking up too, stretching old timber bones that have carried centuries of royal vanity. The candles here burn taller, casting warmer light that turns the paintings honey gold around the edges. It feels almost comforting until you realize the warmth draws your eyes directly to a portrait unlike any you've seen so far. It's not the subject that surprises you, it's the colors. The pigments gleam with unnatural richness, as though someone bottled sunlight, moonlight, and a bit of scandal, shook it together in a jar, and painted with that. The reds are too bright, the blues too deep, the greens richer than the gardens a king once ordered but never watered. Even the whites have a pearly sheen, like they were coaxed from crushed seashells instead of ground lead. You step closer, cautiously. This portrait feels alive. It shows a noblewoman seated beside a window, her gown cascading in layers of embroidered silk, a visual whisper of wealth. But it's the palette that catches your breath. You've seen red before, but not this red. It vibrates softly against the candlelight, almost glowing. And then it hits you, the quirky tidbit you read once, while procrastinating on something important. Some court painters used pigments so rare and costly they were practically contraband. Reds from cochineal beetles shipped across oceans, purples from murex snails that smelled like ocean-aged death, blues from lapis lazuli mined in Afghanistan and worth more than gold, and even a golden yellow made from powdered saffron, which feels deeply impractical, as if you're painting with gourmet spices. You lean closer. The folds of her gown shimmer with ultramarine, pure, luxurious, painfully expensive ultramarine. It was a colour reserved for saints, queens, and people whose pockets went much deeper than their moral integrity. Royal treasuries sometimes kept lapis stones locked away to be ground only for very important portraits. Tim. And this one? Someone splurged. Your fingers hover just above the surface. You shouldn't touch, obviously. But the temptation whispers. A slow breath pulls through your lungs. You notice a thin line of brighter pigment along her sleeve, not a highlight, but an alteration, a different recipe of ultramarine layered over the original. Retouching or intentional disguise, you narrow your eyes. Painters used pigment strategically, hidden meanings, buried messages. Blue could signal loyalty, red, passion or power. Yellow could mark treachery, depending on the court and its particular brand of drama. But here, the blue seems heavy, concentrated exactly where it shouldn't be. You murmur, who are you trying to protect? And the air shifts just enough to give you goosebumps. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Artists in the 16th and 17th centuries often mixed pigments with binders like egg yolk, walnut oil, even beer. Whatever helped colour cling to canvas. Some binders aged well, others rotted, literally, which explains why certain portraits smell faintly like a medieval tavern when restored. You lean even closer and catch the faintest whiff. Warm, nutty, slightly sweet, walnut oil, expensive like everything else about this painting. Someone poured resources into this portrait. Someone wanted this woman immortalized vividly. Historians still argue whether this portrait's unusual palette was symbolic, a coded message meant for one set of eyes, or whether the painter was simply flexing their art budget like a monarch showing off new horses. Some insist the excessive ultramarine symbolized spiritual purity. Others say it was political allegiance, and a bold few claim it was a color-coded message for a forbidden lover, the way some teenagers today use emojis. You smile, imagining the noble woman commissioning her portrait with a sly whisper. Make sure the blue is obvious. But then you notice something more interesting. The pigments don't match in light. You take a step back, tilting your head. The ultramarine in the shadows is deeper, heavier, almost bruised, while the ultramarine in the highlights is bright, airy. Two different blues, two different sources, which meant two different intentions. You trace the lines with your eyes. One ultramarine outlines her left sleeve, her collar, her waist. The other marks only two places, her hand resting on a book and the small ring on her finger. A ring painted in a pigment that was, historically, difficult to acquire unless you had connections or secrets. You inhale softly. Ah, we're playing pigment espionage tonight. The woman's expression looks serene, but there's tension in her jaw, barely visible, but enough to suggest she didn't want this portrait made, or she wanted it made exactly this way. The painter captured something more than beauty here, captured resistance maybe, or fear, or longing. You lower your eyes to the book under her hand. It's painted in muddier tones, brown, grey, and that rare saffron yellow. The title isn't visible, but the spine carries a symbol, 3 tiny dots arranged in a triangle. You've seen that before in medieval manuscripts marking secret societies of scholars, theologians, or rebellious thinkers who believed knowledge didn't belong only to kings. A quirky tidbit whispers through your brain. A few rare pigments were tied to clandestine circles of intellectuals who communicated by subtly marking their portraits, books, and even clothing with signature colors. Blue for philosophy, red for forbidden literature, yellow for mysticism. You spot all three here. Your breath fogs slightly in the cooler air of this corner. You whisper, "Who were you?" And it's not rhetorical anymore. This portrait feels like a biography hidden under layers of varnish. Then you see something faint, almost invisible unless the light hits it just right. A line of pigment along the edge of the curtain behind her. A sliver of green. Not emerald, not verdigris, but malachite. Malachite was notoriously unstable when mixed wrong, prone to cracking, fading, turning brownish or blackish with age. And here the malachite line looks fractured, tiny fissures spiderwebbing through it. Someone added it later. Not the original painter, a restorer, or someone trying to hide something. You step back, crossing your arms, letting the entire composition settle into your perception. Everything feels intentional, every pigment a choice, every crack a clue. The noblewoman seems to look at you knowingly. Her expression is still serene, but you can almost hear her voice whispering through the centuries. I left more in the colors than in the pose. You exhale slowly, deeply. The room feels warmer now, softer, more alive. Another painting hangs just beside hers, a smaller canvas, flat and unassuming. But the pigments on its borders are muddied, mixed, blended strangely. You lean in and see what looks like fingerprints in the underpainting, actual fingerprints. Painters sometimes smudged pigment with their thumbs, but this is different. This is deliberate, a coded mark. Some historians believe fingerprint swirls in background pigments served as hidden signatures used when painters feared political retaliation. You step back with a tiny smile. This artist had no chill. You move on, your footsteps slow and rhythmic. The gallery feels deeper now, not just a collection of faces, but a web of pigment-encoded stories. Every choice mattered, every hue carried weight. Every brush stroke is an argument, a secret, a confession. The candles flicker, the air hums, the walls breathe out quiet warmth. And you continue forward, drawn by colours that were meant to be hidden, messages left in the very chemistry of paint. Some portraits reveal their secrets in smiles, others in shadows, but these whisper through pigment, rare, forbidden, costly, and utterly unafraid. You're not just wandering through a gallery anymore. You're reading the diary of a painter who wrote in colours instead of ink. And there are far more entries waiting ahead. You continue along the gallery's gentle curve, letting the hum of candlelight settle into your bones like a lullaby. The air is cooler here, quieter, almost reverent. Paintings grow smaller, more intimate, as though the walls are leading you toward something fragile, something someone once tried very hard to hide. And that's when you see it. A portrait so delicate, so understated, you almost walk past it. The frame is simple oak, softened by centuries of touch. The canvas inside is small, no larger than a school notebook, and the colours are faint, worn down to powdered whispers. You lean closer, breath held instinctively because the subject is a child, a royal child, judging by the embroidered collar stiff enough to double as medieval armour for toddlers. But something about him feels wrong. Not in a frightening way, more in a story hiding in plain sight way. The boy stands beside a velvet chair, one hand resting on the arm, as though someone posed him there and told him very sternly not to move. His expression is solemn, too solemn for someone whose biggest worry should be dropping crumbs on expensive carpets. His hair is carefully combed, his shoes polished, his collar aggressively starched, as if no one trusted him to look royal. Without adult intervention, you tilt your head and the lighting shifts. The boy's hand looks odd, slightly blurred, almost repainted. You lean closer until your forehead is practically kissing the varnish. And there it is, a faint outline, barely visible beneath the top layers of paint. A second hand, larger, adult-sized. You pull back softly. Someone painted over it. A mainstream historical fact settles into your thoughts. Royal portraits of heirs were often edited when political situations changed, especially when a child was no longer expected to take the throne. If an heir died, fell out of favour, or was replaced, the portrait might be altered. Faces softened, features blurred, symbols removed, or entire figures painted over. You scan the edge of the canvas. A slight ripple sits along the upper right corner where the paint layers thicken. Someone added something there, or covered something. You whisper, "Okay, what were they trying to erase?" And the gallery reacts with a hush that feels almost protective. You step back to view the entire composition. The boy's posture seems too rigid, his eyes too unfocused. His left shoulder slightly too high, as if covering where another shoulder used to be. Historians still argue whether this child once shared the portrait with a sibling, an older brother removed after a scandal, an illness, or a quiet political erasure no one was supposed to question. Some scholars think the original painting included the heir apparent, but when the younger sibling became politically advantageous, the painter was ordered to adjust the family narrative. Others argue the opposite, that the boy in this painting was the original heir, replaced by a cousin or rival branch of the family, and thus painted out of every record except this faded memory. Your breath slows, the candlelight trembles, you let your eyes wander lower toward the hem of the boy's tunic, and that's when you see it. a shoe that doesn't match. His right shoe is painted in firm, bold strokes, confident, clean, clear. His left shoe, faint, almost ghost-like, as if the original foot beneath it belonged to someone else entirely. A quirky tidbit you once read comes back. Sometimes, when heirs vanished from portraits, their shoes were the hardest parts to erase because the underpainting still showed through with infrared imaging. Conservators found mismatched shoes in multiple royal portraits, often indicating hidden edits or swapped identities. You straighten slowly, and the gallery seems to tighten around you, not menacingly, but expectantly, like it wants you to notice something more. So you look again. At the boy's expression, at the stiffness in his arms, at the faint outline on the floor beside him, like a shadow missing from the light. Not his shadow, someone else's, barely visible, barely there, but present. You whisper the obvious. Someone stood next to you once. The boy's eyes suddenly feel different, sad almost, as though he remembers being part of something not shown anymore. His irises are painted with a rare pigment, lead tin yellow, which tends to darken with age, giving them a haunting depth. You wonder if the painter did that intentionally, choosing a pigment that would age like sorrow. You shift to the right, adjusting your gaze. A faint, vertical streak appears just behind the chair, a line of altered background color. Thicker paint, an erasure scar. The more you look, the clearer it becomes. A second figure once stood behind the boy. The height suggests an older child, maybe the true heir the crown wanted erased from memory. Or maybe the painter removed a sibling who died young to prevent the portrait from becoming a visual reminder of royal fragility. And then your breath catches, because the erased figure wasn't just removed, it was replaced. Below the layers, beneath the shadows, you spot a faint glimmer of olive-green pigment, a cloak, the kind only a designated heir wore during ceremonial sittings. Your heart settles into a slow, heavy rhythm, the kind that makes the air feel denser. You lean close again, eyes narrowing. There, on the boy's collar, tiny lace patterns don't match. One side has star motifs, the other crescent shapes. Why? Because part of the collar once belonged to someone else, someone painted out, someone replaced. You whisper, "You weren't supposed to be here alone." And in the hush of the gallery, the child's painted gaze feels like agreement. You straighten, letting your fingers hover above the frame again, feeling the warmth of the old wood, the way it holds secrets like pressed flowers. Another portrait hangs beside it, small and unassuming, showing the same boy a few years older. His shoulders broader, his eyes sharper, but the color palette is different, lighter, simpler. No erasures, no altered shadows, it looks honest. You sense the painter didn't dare hide anything in this updated portrait, because by then, whatever happened was already decided. Whatever sibling or rival once existed, already gone, already forgotten by everyone, except the painter who left traces in the first portrait, like a whisper to the future. And you, standing here in the candle glow, breathing in the varnished air, are the one who followed those whispers. You step away, slowly, gently. The child remains behind you, small, solemn, alone, but now he feels less like a royal symbol and more like a real person whose story was folded, edited, and scraped until it fits someone else's script. You keep walking. The gallery deepens. The portraits ahead wait with their own secrets, some intentional, others accidental, all of them stubborn in their refusal to stay quiet. And you follow because that's what you do here. You listen to the things the paint tried to hide. You move forward, letting the floorboards murmur softly beneath you, each step carrying you deeper into the gallery's quieter, stranger heart. The walls close in just slightly, enough to create the feeling that this hallway is meant only for those who know how to look. The candles burn lower, their light turning warmer, thicker, as if the shadows themselves have decided to lean closer and eavesdrop on whatever you're about to discover. That's when you see it, a portrait that doesn't behave. It's large, wider than tall, framed in dark walnut polished to a dull gleam. The painting shows a nobleman standing in his study, huge windows behind him, spilling imaginary daylight across the room. But something about this composition feels slippery. Like the longer you look at it, the more the angles start quietly arguing with each other. You inhale slowly and step closer. The nobleman's expression is stern but not unkind, more like someone who tolerates nonsense only in very small, well-regulated doses. His hair curls slightly at the temples, his hands rest on a desk cluttered with parchment, and his posture is stiff enough to qualify as a tax category. All normal, so far. But then your eyes drift to the back of the room. A mirror hangs behind him, an oval mirror with a carved frame. The light glints off its surface in a way that suggests depth. But the reflection is wrong. Very wrong. You lean in, squinting just slightly. The mirror does not reflect the nobleman. You straighten, blink once, then lean in again. Nope. Still wrong. Instead of the nobleman, the mirror reflects someone else entirely. A second figure. A shadowed person standing just behind him, but not in the real scene, only in the reflection. Your pulse softens into a slow, curious beat. The reflected figure stands tall, shoulders squared, features blurred just enough to keep them anonymous. Their presence feels deliberate, intentional, not an accident, not a mistake, not laziness. Painters of this era were meticulous with mirrors. They understood reflection, distortion, angles. They used mirrors as symbols of truth, deceit, introspection, or sometimes just to flex their geometry skills. A mainstream historical fact slides in. Many Renaissance and Baroque artists used mirrors in portraits to reveal hidden truths, often suggesting the subject's private self, their unseen influences, or their concealed enemies. Sometimes mirrors revealed what the subject wanted to hide. Sometimes they revealed what the painter wanted you to know. You whisper, "So who are you scared of?" And the gallery responds with a hush, so soft it feels like velvet brushing your cheek. You shift to the left. The reflection shifts too, but not in a natural way. Not like a mirror, following your perspective. Instead, the reflected figure stays fixed, staring, not at the nobleman, not into the mirror, but directly out of the portrait, at you. Your breath catches gently. Not in fear, just in that, oh, this is interesting way that happens when history drops a riddle in your lap. Then you notice the nobleman's hand resting on the desk. It's steady, calm, composed. But his knuckles are white, as if gripping the desk too tightly, as if he knew the mirror betrayed him, as if the painter painted the truth he never intended to show. You shift again, stepping to the right. And that's when you see another detail, tiny, delicate, hidden in the mirror's edge. A signature, the painter's signature, but not his usual one. Court painters often had two signatures, one public, one private. The public one was neat, legible, court-approved. The private one? A symbol, a mark, a flourish hidden in corners when the painter wanted to say, "I know something you don't." And this signature is the private kind, a small swirl resembling a four-pointed star. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some painters used coded symbols to indicate fear. A star with 4 points often meant, "I'm being watched." A different star with 5 points meant, "I'm safe." A crescent sometimes meant commission forced. And a triangle could mean politically dangerous. This is the fear star. You lean back slowly. The nobleman's portrait shifts under the candlelight, the reflection trembling as though the mirror is made of water. You whisper, so someone was there with you. And the reflected figure seems to lean forward just slightly, so slightly you almost blame your imagination. Historians still debate the identity of the reflected shadow. Some argue it was a political rival with dangerous power. Others think it was the nobleman's older brother, rumoured to have died suddenly, too suddenly. A third camp speculates it was a foreign agent, someone whose influence was meant to remain invisible. And then there are the fringe theorists, always fun, who claim the figure was the painter himself, slipping his own presence into the mirror to signal a kind of silent witness. You inhale the faint scent of varnish, the soft dust floating in the air. The nobleman's eyes feel heavier now, like they're silently begging you to understand something he couldn't say aloud. You lean in even more. Something glints on the desk, a small metal seal. You squint. The wax seal on one of the letters is cracked, and underneath the crack, a different colour, a different emblem entirely, painted over, hidden. You step closer, letting your breath fog the varnish. The original emblem was a falcon, the symbol of a rival house. The seal was altered to show a lion, the nobleman's own crest. Someone rewrote the story of this letter after the painting was finished, or after the nobleman died. You murmur, you didn't trust the people around you, did you? The mirror shifts again, the shadowed figure remains. You take one slow step back, letting the composition breathe. And as you do, you notice something almost imperceptible. The nobleman's shoulders are not aligned. One is tense, raised, coiled with stress, the other lowered, relaxed, exposed. People under threat often hold their bodies like that, half-guarded, half pretending everything is fine. The painter saw it, captured it, and hid the explanation in the mirror. You exhale softly, letting the truth settle into your chest. The painting feels warm now, as though the candles have finally melted through the veil of secrecy. You step away from the portrait, your footsteps slow, measured. The hallway ahead stretches into dimness, the air thick with the stories of other canvases waiting their turn. But as you walk, you feel the nobleman behind you, still gripping the desk, still watching the mirror that betrayed him. And you keep moving, guided now by the strange certainty that mirrors never lie. But painters? They sometimes lie beautifully. There are more lies waiting ahead. More truths disguised as brushstrokes. More secrets varnished into silence. And you, wandering deeper into this dim-lit gallery, are exactly the person these portraits have been waiting for. You continue onward, letting the gallery guide you, as though the floor itself has decided to adopt you, softly tilting beneath your steps, nudging you toward the next secret that has waited far too long under varnish and dust. The candles here burn taller, steadier, like they're finally confident you've proven yourself worthy as the unofficial therapist of troubled portraits. And then something catches your eye, a flash of colour. Nothing dramatic, just a soft bloom of rose gold peeking from the corner of a frame. You turn, and there it is, a portrait that hums with warmth, even in this dim corridor. The subject is a woman, young, bright-eyed, wearing a gown embroidered with delicate botanical motifs. Not the stiff, formal flowers that scream, "I am royalty, fear my roses." No, these flowers curve gently around her sleeves and neckline, wildflowers, meadow flowers, flowers that don't ask permission to grow. You step closer. The woman's expression is calm, but there's a softness in her eyes, a glimmer that wasn't painted for vanity or status. It looks like a memory, a private one, the kind someone hides under a pillow or behind a diary lock. And then you see it. Hidden right beneath her sleeve, so tiny you almost miss it, is a symbol, a heart. Not a cliché cartoon heart, of course. A Renaissance heart, narrower, elongated, slightly curved to suggest the chambers of an anatomical drawing, but still unmistakably a heart. You lean in, eyebrows raised. Well, someone was bold, you whisper. During her era, open romantic symbols were forbidden in formal portraits. Love was fine, but hinting at love in anything publicly displayed? Absolutely not. That was a recipe for gossip, and gossip in a royal court spreads faster than Wi-Fi. A mainstream historical fact floats to you. Court painters often hid romantic messages through coded symbols, flowers, ribbons, animals, or small objects tucked subtly into clothing. A pansy meant think of me. A carnation meant betrothal. A rose meant passion. And a heart? That was practically shouting. You lean closer, tracing it with your eyes. At first, it looks like nothing more than embroidery, but the stitching pattern is wrong. The threads curve deliberately, forming a precise shape that couldn't possibly be accidental. Historians still argue whether symbols like this were placed by the painter or requested by the sitter. One camp insists painters risked everything to honor forbidden romances. Another group believes noblewomen frequently bribed painters to slip coded messages into their portraits for lovers to decode. And then there's the fringe group, the spicy historians who claim mistresses used portrait symbols like secret challenges. Find the hidden heart and you win the scandal. You smile. This portrait definitely sits in spicy territory. The woman's posture is graceful, a slight tilt of the shoulders, a turned chin, a soft, almost shy curl in her lip. It's subtle enough to pass as demure, but her eyes, they're focused not on the viewer but slightly to the left, towards someone off frame. Someone the painter didn't include, someone she was looking at during the sitting. You breathe in slowly, letting the candlelight catch the tiny flecks of gold in the varnish. Then you spot the flowers along her neckline. Not random. Arranged in patterns. 5 petals, then 3 petals, then 5 petals again. A quirky tidbit whispers up from some dusty memory. Certain lovers used numerical flower sequences as secret messages. 535 could mean, my heart returns to yours, or I remember. Lovers, with more mathematical flair, used Fibonacci sequences, romance, but make it nerdy. And here? This pattern matches the symbolic code used in one duchess's letters to her forbidden partner. You trace the flowers with your eyes and your heart gives a tiny, involuntary squeeze. This isn't just artistry. This is longing stitched into pigment. You step back to take in the whole portrait again. And then you notice something else, something tiny tucked into the folds of her dress near her waist. A ribbon painted in a soft blush pink. Ribbons were powerful symbols during her era. Knotted ribbons showed devotion. Looped ribbons meant separation. Twisted ribbons? Complication. But this ribbon is folded over itself twice, forming a shape resembling an infinity symbol. You whisper, "Oh, you were in love." As you look closer, you notice the ribbon's paint glows more brightly under the candlelight. It's mixed with a pigment containing real crushed pearls, a luxury used only for extremely personal commissions. The painter clearly spent extra time on this small detail, blending light and silkiness into the ribbon so it catches your attention only when you're close enough to feel her story. You tilt your head and step even closer to examine the background. Behind her, there's a tapestry with subtle patterns, trees, vines, birds. But in the bottom left corner, just above the frame, is a faint outline of a small songbird. Not any bird, a goldfinch. Goldfinches symbolized abiding love, love that persisted despite obstacles, distance, or inconvenient royal marriages arranged to secure political alliances. The more you look, the clearer it becomes. Every detail is coded: the heart, the flowers, the ribbon, the goldfinch. This isn't a portrait, it's a love letter. you feel a soft heat rise in your chest. Not from romance itself, but from the intimacy of seeing something meant only for two people, something the court missed, something history forgot. You lean in one last time and examine the woman's hands. They're folded neatly, lightly touching at the fingertips, but the shadow between her fingers forms a tiny triangle. You narrow your eyes. Triangles had meaning too. Point upward, hope. Point downward, sorrow. Sideways, separation. This one is slightly tilted, neither up nor down, just suspended. You murmur, "You didn't know how it would end, did you?" The painting feels heavier suddenly, thicker with meaning. The candle flame beside it leans toward the canvas, as though drawn to the warmth of the story embedded there. You step away slowly, letting the portrait settle into silence again. But the secret lingers, sweet and sad, brushing against you like a memory. As you move on, the gallery shifts around you. The portraits ahead blur into soft silhouettes, waiting for their turn. But for a few steps, your mind stays with the woman in the embroidered gown, her heart quietly stitched into every colour. Her secret love might be centuries gone, but tonight, in the hush of this dim-lit corridor, someone finally saw her message. And that someone is you. You keep walking, and the gallery welcomes you deeper, ready with more secrets no one ever intended to reveal. The air cools as you move forward, as though the gallery itself knows what comes next requires a steadier breath, a quieter mind. The candles burn lower here, their flames shrinking into small, flickering pearls of gold that barely touch the walls. The portraits grow simpler now, humbler, their frames less ornate, their subjects less polished. It feels like stepping out of a grand ballroom into a servant's corridor, except this corridor is still lined with the wealthy, the powerful, the curated. Still there's a shift, a soft one, a lowering of pretense, and then you see it, the portrait that pretends it's unimportant, which is always the giveaway. It hangs crookedly, just a few degrees off, but enough that your eyes tug toward it. The frame is faded oak, the varnish uneven. It looks like someone hung it quickly, maybe even reluctantly. The subject is a noble family clustered around a pedestal, holding a vase of flowers, a typical group portrait. The father standing tall, one hand on the hilt of a sword. The mother posed with the serene, exhausted smile of someone who sits for too many portraits. 3 children arranged just so, the heir, the spare, and the daughter whose expression says she has already learned how to hide her opinions very, very well, but your attention slides right past all of them because the real star of this painting is someone else entirely. In the background, barely visible unless you know to look, is a figure painted so small, so faint, you almost mistake them for part of the wallpaper. A servant, a young woman positioned near the doorway, half in shadow, eyes lowered. At first glance, she looks like an afterthought, a background filler, a decorative non-person, but she shouldn't be there. Servants almost never appeared in noble family portraits unless the family wanted to show off wealth by including attendants, a maid pouring wine, a footman holding a hunting dog, a nursemaid steadying a toddler with alarming posture. But this girl, she isn't doing anything, not serving, not assisting, just standing there, watching. You lean closer, slow and silent. Her gaze is downward, but her eyes, painted with just a few strokes, are angled oddly, not at the floor, not at the family, but sideways, toward the eldest child. You narrow your eyes. "Who are you?" you whisper. And the gallery falls still as if waiting for the answer. A mainstream historical fact drifts in. Servants were sometimes included in portraits only if they held personal significance to the family, nannies, tutors, or companions to noble children. But they were painted clearly with dignity, placed where viewers would understand their role. This girl? She has no role, no defined task, no explanation. She just exists. Historians still debate whether such figures were symbolic warnings, reminders of mortality, or whether they were painted placeholders for secrets that couldn't be acknowledged publicly. And then there's the theory nobody wants to say too loudly. Sometimes servants were included because they knew too much, or because they were part of stories the family couldn't erase without raising questions. You lean closer. The girl's dress is plain, dark brown, but the painter added the faintest sheen of blue along the hem, barely visible but there. A highlight that doesn't match the color of her garment. Painters rarely wasted expensive pigments on servants unless they were important or symbolic. A quirky tidbit whispers up. A stray blue highlight in servant attire sometimes indicated a caretaker bond, the kind seen in portraits where nursemaids were practically second mothers to their charges. You glance at the eldest child, about 10 years old, stiff posture, forced dignity. His expression is straining, a tightness around the eyes suggesting he didn't want to stand here either. You notice his right hand, clenched, the knuckles subtly white. He's standing closest to the servant girl. Too close. You lean in further. Behind the girl, the shadows deepen unnaturally, thick with burnt umber. The painter tried to hide her, tried to make her part of the architecture, but the more you look, the clearer it is that she was painted after the initial composition. Her outline overlaps the original background. Her feet are not perfectly aligned with the floor. Her shadow falls in a direction inconsistent with the family's shadows. You murmur, "You weren't meant to be in this painting at first." Then you shift your angle and see a faint, ghost-like shape, another figure beneath her paint layer. A taller one, a hunched shoulder, a suggestion of an older servant, maybe a dismissed maid or someone the family wanted forgotten. The girl was painted over that figure later, perhaps because she became more important to the story. You step back slowly, letting the portrait settle into clarity. The servant girl's gaze, sideways, quiet, secretive, looks almost protective, as though she's watching over the eldest child, as though she knows something the family pretends not to see. You lean in again, this time examining the child's sleeve. There's a small smudge near the cuff, barely noticeable, a darker shade of blue than the rest of his coat. A fingerprint-sized smudge. It matches the blue highlight on the servant girl's hem. Your breath catches. The painter didn't add that by accident. He painted her, touching him, holding his sleeve, steadying him, then erased the gesture but left the trace in color. He couldn't bring himself to cover it fully. Historians still argue whether this servant girl was the boy's caretaker, his confidant, or perhaps someone whose presence quietly defied the family's narrative. Some suggest she educated him in secret. Others think she protected him from a father known for cruelty. A few claim she later vanished under mysterious circumstances, her story erased everywhere except here in pigment. You take one more step back and focus on the girl's hands. One hand is painted with slightly too much detail, especially compared to her plain clothing. Her fingers curl inward, as if gripping something small. A key, a ribbon, a folded note. You squint. There, a tiny streak of red paint beneath her thumb. Red made from cochineal, expensive, forbidden for servants, a color that usually indicates intimacy or significance. You inhale softly. She kept something, you whisper. Something important. Then you see it. The faint outline of a small object tucked into the folds of her dress. A sliver of blue. A tiny stitched emblem. A crest. Not the father's crest, not the mother's, but matching the eldest son's personal insignia. One children were sometimes given for education or protection. She was his protector, not officially, not publicly, but deeply. You step away and the painting finally reveals its truth. This portrait isn't about the noble family. It's about the girl in the corner, the one they didn't want to highlight, the one who saw everything, the one who held the child's secrets, the one the painter refused to erase completely, even when ordered. You walk forward slowly, almost reverently, feeling her gaze at your back, not haunting, just grateful maybe, that someone finally noticed her. The gallery deepens in silence, the candles shimmer softly, and you continue, knowing the next painting will have its own story of secrets, framed in gilded lies. You move forward, letting that quiet, invisible thread tug you deeper into the gallery until the walls feel closer, the air denser, the candle flames stretched thin as if holding their breath. The portraits here are different, less polished, less proud, more unsettled. Like they're hiding something beneath their surface, and even the varnish can't quite keep it down. And then you see the painting that practically vibrates with wrongness. A large canvas hangs alone on the right wall, framed in dark wood that swallows the candlelight instead of reflecting it. At first glance, it looks like a typical aristocratic portrait, a young man standing in a garden, one hand resting on a stone wall, the other holding a rolled parchment. His posture stiff, his clothing immaculate, his expression hovering somewhere between smug and constipated, as aristocratic expressions often do. But the moment you step closer, your stomach tilts. Something about this painting doesn't match itself. The light is inconsistent. The shadows shift strangely across the stone wall. The background foliage blends awkwardly with the figure, like two images layered together with slightly different intentions. You lean in, squinting, and that's when you notice the faint ridges beneath the surface. Not cracks, ridges, brushstrokes going in two different directions. "Oh," you whisper softly, "someone repainted this in a hurry." A cold ripple moves across the air at your back. A mainstream historical fact slides into your thoughts. Portraits were sometimes revised overnight, when political news forced an immediate rewrite of public image, especially if a noble fell from grace or suddenly rose to power. Entire faces could be repainted, jewelry altered, even backgrounds replaced. In a few dramatic cases, the subject changed entirely, while the original sitter's outline still ghosted beneath. You step closer, letting your breath steady. The young man's face is too smooth compared to the rest of the painting. No natural aging, no subtle texture. The skin looks newer than the clothing. His left eye is painted with a slightly different pigment blend, paler, cooler, than the right. Whoever made the alteration either ran out of the original mix or didn't care to match it perfectly. You lower your gaze to the hand holding the parchment. That hand is painted in crisp, clean strokes. The other hand, resting on the stone wall, is older, darker, more textured. You actually see tiny cracks of age in the knuckles that don't exist anywhere else on the figure. Two hands, two eras, two versions of the same person, combined into one uncomfortable whole. You murmur, "You weren't supposed to look like this, were you?" The candle flickers, the air shifts. You tilt your head to study the stone wall behind him. The stones are irregular, weathered, painted in muted, earthy tones, but the shadows cast by his hand don't align with the wall's cracks. His hand shadows are long and diagonal. The wall's shadows are short and horizontal. Two light sources, two layers, two painters. Historians still argue whether this portrait was altered due to scandal or tragedy. One theory suggests the original sitter died unexpectedly, and instead of wasting a perfectly good canvas, the family repurposed it for a cousin who needed a quick PR boost. Another theory claims the original noble was disgraced, exiled or imprisoned, and his face was replaced with a more loyal relative. And then there's the bolder theory whispered in academic corners. The original sitter returned too soon, unexpectedly, and the family panicked. You run your gaze across the garden background, noticing how the foliage behind the figure has two distinct color temperatures, one section warm and sunlit, the other cool and shadowed. Leaves painted in different techniques overlap, half blended, half fighting each other. Then you see it, a faint glow of pink beneath the newer green leaves, a layer of crimson hidden under a patch of foliage, a ghost of a cloak. Someone in the original painting wore red. You inhale slowly, letting the portrait come into focus not as it is, but as it was. You can almost picture the original sitter, perhaps wearing a bold cloak, standing in a more dramatic pose. Someone whose ambitions or missteps required erasing. A quirky tidbit whispers up, painters sometimes used a red underlayer for figures they knew would be replaced. Not intentionally symbolic, just a practical choice, since red helped warm skin tones. But when revisions were rushed, red often bled through the top layer in strange places, and here it bleeds at the edge of the stone wall, forming a faint outline of a shoulder. You lean in closer. Yes, there it is, the silhouette of a shoulder pad, larger, broader, not matching the current figure at all. The original sitter was bigger. You step back, letting the two figures overlay in your imagination like transparent ghosts. The young man you see now, slimmer, more nervous, stands in the pose once occupied by someone more imposing, someone the painter tried, desperately, to hide. Then you see the most telling clue, the parchment in the young man's hand. The detail seems crisp at first, but as you look closer, you see faint, tiny brushstrokes beneath the surface. Letters, old letters, barely visible, readjusted, scraped, repainted. The parchment originally had writing. You press in, squinting. The faint outline of a word emerges, edictus, Latin for decree, a political document, something someone did not want viewers to see. Historians still debate what it said. Some believe the original sitter authored a controversial decree erased after his fall. Others suspect it was a forbidden alliance contract. A few conspiracy-leaning scholars argue it was an order of exile, perhaps even the sitter's own. Then your eyes settle on the stone wall again. A carved pattern emerges beneath the repainting, a sigil, a crest. Not the current family crest, the old one. This painting belonged to a family whose power shifted abruptly. A coup, a succession crisis, a scandal buried in overnight repainting. You whisper softly, your story was rewritten while you slept. And the portrait feels suddenly alive with tension, as though the figure inside is uncomfortable wearing someone else's ghost. Your gaze drifts to the frame. A small carved rosette is missing from the bottom corner. You kneel to inspect it. The wood around the missing piece is lighter, newer, changed, adjusted, repaired. Something happened to this painting, not just artistically, physically. Perhaps someone tried to remove it, or damage it, or hide it. You stand again and examine the young man's face. His expression is stiff, nervous, almost apologetic, as if he knows the portrait wasn't truly his, but he's trapped inside it anyway. You step back slowly. This isn't just a portrait. It's a crime scene, a story overwritten, an identity stolen, a truth buried under a single night's frantic brushstrokes, and you, wandering quietly under candlelight, have become the first person in centuries to read the palimpsest properly. You inhale deeply, feeling the weight of what you just uncovered, but the gallery calls you onward. More secrets wait. More stories, painted twice. And you keep walking, the image of the overwritten noble lingering behind you like a ghost, begging to be remembered. You walk on, letting the uneasy quiet of that overwritten nobleman fade slowly behind you, though not entirely. His ghosted silhouette clings to your thoughts like a stubborn smudge of varnish. The gallery shifts again, narrowing even more, until the walls feel almost like they're leaning in, listening with you. The candles thin out. The air grows colder. The floorboards creak under your feet in long, sighing groans, as though the wooden beams have finally decided to stop pretending that time hasn't been kneeling on their ribs for centuries. And then you see it. A portrait that isn't a portrait. Not really. Not anymore. The canvas is tall but unfinished. The frame still rough in places where the wood was never fully polished. Flecks of gesso cling to its edges. The cloth has patches of bare underdrawing. Those ghostly charcoal lines artists use to sketch figures before adding colour. You step closer, inhaling the familiar scent of old linseed oil and something else, something faintly metallic, like rust or old blood. Except it isn't that dark, it's more like the scent of tools left outside during rain. You tilt your head. The painting shows a room, a studio, dimly lit by a window whose light falls across an empty chair. An artist's mahl stick leans against the frame, and a palette sits precariously on a table nearby, dried pigments cracking like tiny, colourful deserts. But the figure meant to sit in the chair. Missing, or rather, abandoned mid-creation. Brushstrokes along the chest area of an unseen figure stop abruptly. The background is more complete than the subject. The painter had blocked in the environment with confidence but hesitated, radically, suddenly, when it came to the sitter. You whisper, "Where did you go?" And your voice feels too loud in this corner. This is the section of the gallery where the painter's presence, the one who stitched the secrets into these portraits, feels strongest, almost like you've walked directly into his absence. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Many artists in royal courts disappeared without explanation, fleeing political upheaval, vanishing after offending nobles, or quietly removed when they saw something they shouldn't. The records often say nothing. Sometimes a single line. He travelled. Or worse, he fell ill. You lean in toward the unfinished figure. The artist had begun painting the hand first, a common technique, but only one hand is sketched clearly. A right hand, slender and expressive, holding something. You squint. It's faint, almost lost in the underdrawing, but the shape is unmistakable. A folded letter. A folded letter painted before any part of the body, which painters almost never did. You blink slowly, letting the candlelight shift. The letter contains faint strokes of red, cochineal again, this time underlying the charcoal sketch. A hidden message. One layered before the painting even began. You steady your breath and shift your attention to the background. The window is open, not wide, just barely ajar. Enough for a breeze, but symbolic of something more. Painters of the era used open windows to signify escape, departure, or freedom. Closed windows meant confinement. Curtains meant secrecy. Open windows? Change. Historians still argue whether the open window in unfinished royal portraits symbolized an artist's desire to flee or whether it was simply a stylistic choice. Some claim painters used open windows when they knew their time in the court was ending, voluntarily or otherwise. You run your gaze across the table near the palette. Something is missing. There's a faint outline in the dust, the shape of a dagger or a palette knife. Something metallic once sat there. The negative space is too precise to be anything accidental. Whatever it was, it's gone now, removed long ago. You step closer, letting the painting fill your vision. The underdrawing of the unfinished man shows an attentive pose. Shoulders squared, posture straight, gaze likely intended to be solemn. The painter had laid out the scaffolding of a powerful portrait. then abandoned it entirely. You can feel that moment like a breath held forever. Your eyes follow the line work of the figure's collar. It's precise, too precise for a sketch, as though the painter drew it while the sitter was right there, and then a blur. The charcoal lines grow shaky near the left shoulder, as if the artist's hand trembled or he was interrupted mid-stroke. You whisper, "Someone walked into the room." The painter erased nothing. He simply stopped. The brushstrokes freeze like a gasp caught in pigment. You step back slowly. The studio depicted in the portrait looks eerily familiar, not in a supernatural way, more in a déjà vu sort of way. You've seen elements of this room hidden in reflections, hinted in backgrounds, echoed in motifs across several other portraits. The stool, the corner drapery, the particular shape of the window, the palette with its same 4 dominant pigments, ultramarine, lead white, cochineal red, and malachite green. This is his studio, the painter's studio, the ghostly room where every secret began. But why paint it here? Why immortalize his own workspace unfinished? A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some painters hid self-portraits or studio scenes behind layers of varnish intentionally, as a final rebellion against patrons who controlled their lives. A few painted their unfinished studios as warnings. If something happens to me, remember where to look. Others used it as a signature only fellow artists would understand. You tilt your head even more and notice a faint marking carved into the wet paint of the windowsill. Not part of the painted scene, actually carved into the paint itself. A crosshatch, 2 small lines forming an X. Painters used X marks in early drafts to indicate mistakes or elements to be replaced. But this is carved after the paint dried. A sign, a message, an X that says, "I was forced to stop." You exhale slowly, then you move to the lower corner of the portrait and freeze. There is a signature, not brushed, scratched. A small line of initials etched into the paint with what must have been a palette knife. E.T. You blink. You've seen those initials before. Hidden in margins, disguised in tapestries, vanishing in shadows, the painter, the rebel. The quiet truth-teller behind all the coded imagery you've been unraveling. He signed this unfinished work as if to say, "This is the last one you'll get from me." You kneel to examine the brushstrokes at the lower edge of the composition. They grow chaotic, half-finished angles, rushed blending, abrupt changes in pigment. Not like his earlier controlled works he left in a hurry. Historians still debate whether he fled the court, was exiled, or simply vanished into obscurity. Some suggest he escaped under cover of night, while others claim he was silenced, quietly, efficiently, before he could reveal what he knew. But there's one more detail, one that makes your chest tighten. Behind the chair, barely visible, lies a smear of dried paint on the floor. Not painted onto the canvas, represented inside the room, a smear of red like a dropped brush or a warning. You stand, slowly. The unfinished studio gazes back at you, hollow and heavy, like the painter left his breath trapped inside it. You take one final step back. This portrait isn't unfinished, not really. It's a confession, a goodbye, a message meant for someone who would one day understand what all these portraits were hiding, and you realize with a soft, steady breath, it's meant for you. You turn away, heart warm and aching, and continue deeper into the gallery toward the final truth waiting to complete the painter's story. You move slowly now, almost reverently, the air thickening as though the gallery itself knows you're approaching the final stretch, the place where all the whispers you've collected, all the sideways glances and hidden brushstrokes gather like dust motes in the last slant of candlelight. The walls seem to draw closer, the floorboards hush beneath your feet, and even your breath falls quieter. softer, as though you might scare away whatever truth waits ahead. Then you see it. The last portrait isn't grand or massive or framed in gold. It's modest, ordinary, unassuming, almost rude considering the dramatic build-up. But something about it draws you like gravity. The frame is matte black, stripped of ornamentation, worn smooth by time. The canvas is a muted cream, softened into sepia tones over centuries. At first glance, you think you're looking at another noble, someone quiet, polite, forgettable. But when you blink, your vision shifts and you realize the truth. This is not a portrait of a person. It's a portrait of portraits, a gallery within the gallery. You step closer. The painting shows the entire room you've spent the night wandering, every corridor, every flickering candle, every uneven floorboard. And lining those painted walls are the same portraits you've just passed, but not as they appear now. No, they're depicted as they once were. The Duchess with the forbidden smirk smiles fully now, unafraid, unmuted. The King with the distorted shadow stands beside the hidden figure, who is now fully rendered beside him. The woman with the secret love symbols holds her ribbon proudly in her hand, no longer tucked faint and shy. The erased heir stands shoulder to shoulder with the sibling who vanished from history. The nobleman, overwritten by another, stands firm, wearing his original red cloak. The servant girl in the corner now occupies a place near the family, visible, central, acknowledged. And the painter's unfinished studio, it appears whole, vibrant, lit by afternoon light. You inhale slowly, your heart rising warm in your chest. This entire gallery, the living one around you, is a graveyard of edited truths. This painting, the final one, is what the portraits wanted to be, what the painter wanted to preserve, what history refused to display. You step closer until you can see the delicate strokes depicting the gallery's farthest walls. And there, painted so faintly you almost miss it, is a tiny figure standing in the doorway. Not part of the original gallery, not part of the court, a wanderer, a visitor, head slightly bowed as though listening. You whisper, "Is that me?" Historians still argue whether painters ever intended to break the fourth wall, to speak directly to viewers centuries ahead. Some believe artists buried messages for the future precisely because the present was too dangerous. Others claim such ideas are romantic overreadings, the imaginative leaps of people who want art to love them back. But standing here, breathing the varnished air, you know the truth. This painter wasn't trying to impress a monarch. He wasn't trying to glorify a court. He was documenting what power tried to hide, faces redrawn, shadows altered, figures deleted, secrets encoded through pigment and lace and empty stares. He painted the truth underneath the performance, and now, centuries later, someone finally saw it. You. You let your fingertips hover above the canvas, almost touching the painted depiction of the gallery's candles, its frames, its silent witnesses. You move your gaze up, tracing the lines of the walls, the portraits, the hidden hearts and shadows and erased hands. And suddenly you see it. A thin line of gold pigment woven throughout the entire composition, so thin it barely registers, but it's there. Gold was expensive, rare, symbolic of light, revelation, divinity. This painter threaded truth with gold. You breathe in slow and deep. The gold threads weave from portrait to portrait, connecting every hidden story. And they all converge in the center of the painting, forming a small, glowing knot of shimmering paint. A nucleus, a beating heart. You lean closer, breath soft on the canvas. The knot of gold forms a symbol you've seen before, once hidden beneath a sleeve, once disguised in a tapestry, once carved faintly in a windowsill, the painter's star. E.T., the secret signature. You smile, soft, sad, grateful. This final portrait is his message, not to the court, not to a patron, but to whoever would one day wander through the dim gallery and pay attention to the whispers, the shadows, the pigment scars. The truth was never erased completely. It was merely waiting. You step back slowly, letting the painting fill your peripheral vision, letting the gold threads shimmer like veins of meaning pulsing under the surface. The gallery feels warmer now, softer, as though exhaling after centuries of holding its breath. And you feel seen in return. The candle flames sway gently and the sighing floorboards fall quiet, and the silence becomes a soft cradle around you, rocking the last secrets into rest. Your eyes half close as you take one last slow step back, letting the room settle into stillness, letting the truths nestle into your memory like feathers drifting down in a soft dusk. And then you let the warmth fade into something softer, a hush, a whisper, a slow dissolving into quiet. And now, as the gallery dims around you, everything softens, the colours, the edges, the questions. The portraits blur gently into a warm haze, their stories folding themselves into calmer shapes as the candlelight thins into a golden sigh. You breathe slowly, letting the last traces of paint and shadow drift away like dust, floating through late evening sun. Nothing presses for answers now, nothing waits to be solved. It all settles quietly into a place far from urgency, far from noise. You are safe here, surrounded by the gentle hum of centuries exhaling. Let your shoulders loosen, your thoughts drift, and your breath fall into an easy rhythm.